We're freezing. Human, get in my bed. Now, ordered the warrior who once hated him. The screech of rending hull faded, replaced by the groan of twisted metal and the hiss of venting atmosphere. Emergency klaxons strobed the corridor in urgent blue, bathing the chaos in electric color. Simon barely registered the jolt that flung him from his console before a force, swift and merciless, slammed him against a warped support beam. A slender, unyielding hand pressed to his throat. Eyes of molten amber, seething with fury, bored into his as the world spun and contracted around that gaze. "This is your doing, Terran." The words vibrated through her, half whisper, half threat, thick with accusation. Her skin, luminous and ethereal, shimmered under the flickering lights, almost translucent, as if the emergency strobes revealed the veins beneath. Black, jagged, crown-like points arched from her brow, a dark contrast to her silver attire, which clung to her like liquid metal. Simon's hands rose, not to fight, but to steady himself against the wall, his fingers trembling from cold and shock. "My doing?" he gasped, every word scraping from his lungs. "I warned you about the plasma eddies. You insisted on a direct course." "You suggested retreat," she spat, her voice a melodic snarl that carried both pride and disdain. Her lips curled, revealing teeth just a bit too sharp, reminding him that though she looked almost human, she was anything but. "Aliran does not evade, not. Your hesitation cost us precious time and put us in the path of the debris field." The ship's AI interrupted, slicing through their standoff with sterile urgency. "Alert! Hull breach in sectors 5, 7, and 10. Atmosphere loss critical. Reactor offline. Life support failure in 9 minutes." Lyra's grip vanished, sudden as a blade being sheathed. She spun away, her focus shifting from Simon to the chaos unraveling around them. He staggered upright, hand going to his bruised neck, feeling the ache deep in his muscles. The air was already frigid. His breath formed pale clouds, swirling in the emergency lighting. "The stasis chamber," he managed, voice hoarse but clear. "It's the most insulated part of the ship. If any pods are functional, we might have a chance." Lyra nodded once, a sharp tilt of her chin, neither agreement nor gratitude, just necessity. She strode forward, movements taut with control, expecting Simon to follow. The battered corridor stretched before them, twisted metal and shattered panels making every step treacherous. Their boots crunched over debris, fragments of the ship and the dreams it once carried. They passed fallen crew, faces frozen in shock, limbs askew where gravity or violence had flung them. Simon averted his gaze, guilt gnawing at him. Lyra did not falter, her amber eyes hard, unreadable. The stasis bay lay near the heart of the ship, miraculously intact. Its inner door was sealed, trapping a shrinking pocket of breathable air, though the temperature was plunging with every moment. 4 pods lined the wall. 3 in ruin, glass fractured, controls dark. Only one glowed with a faint blue light, a thin aura shimmering in the gloom. "Lorraine make, of course." Lyra swept her pale fingers over its surface, and the blue glow intensified, as if responding to her touch. Her breath came in ragged, misty clouds, frost beginning to feather her skin. The AI's voice echoed in the cold. "External temperature, minus 130 Celsius and falling. Internal temperature will match in 30 minutes. Simon's thermal implants pulsed at their limit, staving off the worst of the cold, but the chill gnawed at his bones. He dropped to his knees by the emergency beacon, fingers clumsy and stiff as he worked at its controls. The beacon pulsed weakly, struggling to pierce the hull's battered shielding. Lyra watched him from across the pod, her gaze sharp and appraising. She saw the flush in his cheeks, the condensation on his lips. Pride warred with desperation in her molten stare. She turned to the pod, then to him. Her voice was brittle, fractured by the cold. "We're freezing, Terran. Get in with me, now." He hesitated, startled not by the command, but by the urgency beneath it. The arrogance in her tone was familiar, but there was a new edge: need. He nodded, understanding that this was survival, not surrender. The pod's hatch hissed open, warm air spilling out, vanishing almost instantly. Lyra slid in first, her slender body pressed against the far wall, posture taut and wary. Simon followed, the hatch sealing behind them with a muffled thud, cocooning them in blackness and silence. The space was barely large enough for two. His leg brushed hers, his arm grazed her side. Her scent filled the close air, sharp and metallic, electric as ozone after a storm. She was so much colder than he was, her skin ice, his warmth leaching into her at every point of contact. This was survival, not intimacy. He shifted, wrapping his arm around her shoulders and drawing her close, feeling her shiver against him. She stiffened as if the touch burned. "Do not presume, Terran." "It's not presumption, it's physics," he murmured. "You're losing heat too fast. I'm warmer, let me help." He whispered her name, Lyra, in the dark, a question and a promise. She hesitated, then relaxed fractionally, her body yielding to his warmth, driven by instinct older than pride. Her shuddering eased, the tremors replaced by something gentler, a slow, steady absorption of his heat. Simon became hyper-aware of every point where they touched. The curve of her waist beneath his hand, the delicate shell of her ear near his chin, the fine tremble in her breath. Silence stretched, punctuated only by the faint hum of the pod and the distant groans of the ship. The AI for once offered no commentary. No. Outside, the storm raged, metal shrieking against the void. Inside, there was only darkness, shared warmth, and the slow synchronization of two heartbeats, a fragile alliance against the cold. Shame flickered from her, but underneath it, Simon felt the desperate need that drove her closer. In the darkness, the tension between them melted into a truce. For this moment, stripped of rank and species, they were only survivors. They whispered, low and halting at first, then more freely, voices muffled by the pod's walls. He spoke of his augmentations, the chill-resistant implants that marked him as Terran and outsider. She told him of her ceremonial markings, the black crown that signified heritage and duty, and the Lyrian contempt for weakness. Her words faltered as she confessed the price of cold, not just death, but a slow decay, a lingering, humiliating end that haunted her people more than any battlefield. Simon's grip tightened. "You're not going to fade away, I promise." His breath was warm against her hair. She trembled, and a single tear, cold as liquid silver, soaked into the fabric at his shoulder. Time in the pod lost all shape, necessity blurring into comfort. Lyra's mind drifted, seeking his warmth for solace as much as survival. Her arms crept around him, her face pressed to the hollow of his neck. He responded instinctively, holding her tighter, his thumb gently tracing the fine, cold line of her jaw. The contact became more than heat. It was comfort, and something deeper, an unexpected, fragile hope, flickering in the dark. Lyra floated in a sea of warmth and darkness. The cold, once a razor on her bones, had vanished, replaced by a cocoon of heat and steady rhythm. For a moment, she allowed herself to surrender, to feel not only the press of Simon's body against hers, but the solidity of his presence, the way his chest rose and fell, the subtle thrum of his heart. She breathed in the faint, earthy scent of his skin, tinged with machine oil and ozone, and clung to the sensation. Here, in this tiny vessel, the ancient fears of her people, the hunger for cold, the terror of comfort, had no weight. But the safety did not last. A nightmare seized her, sudden as an airlock rupture. She was back on Lyrian, cast out into a white wasteland, the sky a frozen sheet, the wind howling like a funeral song. Her crown shattered, her body wasting, each step a humiliation. The exile's chill crept in, burrowing through flesh and memory. A strangled cry escaped her lips as she jolted awake, panic clawing at her throat. Simon's arms tightened, strong and reassuring, pulling her close. "It's all right," he murmured, voice low and soft as velvet. "You're safe. I've got you." His hand moved in gentle circles on her back, and he spoke nonsense syllables, words with no meaning but full of comfort. The nightmare receded, leaving only his warmth and the cadence of his breathing. She pressed her face to his chest, listening to his heartbeat, drawing strength from its steady drum. For a long time she stayed there, her fingers splayed across the fabric of his shirt, knuckles white. At last she spoke, her voice ragged, every word a struggle. "My kind believe emotion is a flaw, a weakness to be purged. My anger at you, it was expected. Discipline, not feeling." Her breath trembled, her confession bleeding into the darkness. Simon stroked her hair, slow and deliberate, the pads of his fingers catching at the ends of her white strands. "Sounds exhausting," he said, a wry smile coloring his tone. A laugh broke from her, a bitter, small sound, quickly swallowed. "It is. There's no room for this." She gestured at the cramped pod, the bare inches between their bodies, the mingled breaths. "This need, this comfort, it's shameful, dangerous." He shifted, careful not to dislodge her, his fingers brushing the bare skin at the nape of her neck. The contact was hesitant, almost apologetic, a brand of warmth against her perpetual chill. "Maybe strength isn't about being cold," he murmured, thumb tracing the sharp edge of one black crown point. She gasped, involuntary, her body arching into his touch. "Maybe it's about surviving, even if it means accepting help from someone you're supposed to despise." His words found their mark, piercing the hard shell she had carried all her life. For a heartbeat, Lyra felt stripped bare. Simon's resilience, his warmth, had saved her. Her pride, her training, they had nearly doomed them both. She tilted her head back, just enough to find his eyes in the dark, her lips parted in silent invitation. His lips found hers, tentative and searching. The kiss was nothing like the cold, ceremonial contact of her homeworld. No calculation, no restraint. Instead, there was a hunger, a need to connect, to anchor herself to something living and real. The darkness thickened around them, erasing boundaries. Her hands slid to his jaw, mapping the unfamiliar angles of his Terran face, feeling the stubble, the heat, the aliveness. She let herself want, just for this moment. A faint, persistent beep intruded, worming its way through the silence. The emergency beacon. Simon froze, lips barely parted from hers, hope flaring in his eyes. "Someone's received the signal," he whispered, relief threading through his exhaustion. Lyra went utterly still, heart pounding. Rescue meant life, but it also meant the end of this fragile sanctuary. The moment between them, so raw, so impossible, would not survive the arrival of her people. "How long?" she asked, voice flat, already bracing herself for the aftermath. "No way to know." Simon's hand lingered at her cheek, unwilling to let go. "But they're coming." His words drew a line between them. He, Terran, she, Lyraean. Whatever they'd found in the dark was doomed to vanish in the light. Her hand traced his jaw, thumb brushing the corner of his mouth, a touch heavy with longing and silent farewell. He caught her hand in both of his, pressing a kiss to her palm. "Lyra." She silenced him with a kiss, sudden and fierce. Her lips were hungry, desperate. His arms crushed her close, his fingers threading through her hair. For a breathless eternity, they clung to each other, staving off the inevitable. The roar of engines shattered the moment. The pod vibrated as a docking clamp latched on, tearing them from their bubble of warmth and privacy. Lyra recoiled, her posture snapping back to rigid attention, putting as much distance between them as the tiny pod allowed. The cold of reality crept in, and she felt it settle into her bones, heavier than any winter. The pod door burst open with a hiss of pressure equalization. Framed in the glare of alien floodlights stood a Lyran male, his armor gleaming, his expression carved from granite. Black crown points jutted from his brow, his eyes hard and judging. Behind him, armed guards in silver exosuits trained weapons into the pod. He took in the tableau. Lyra alive, upright, a Terran male half-curled protectively around her, their bodies unmistakably close. Disgust twisted his mouth. "Warrior," he barked, voice echoing with authority. "Explain this contamination." Lyra's body went cold, but her mind snapped into motion. Before she could draw breath, the commander stabbed a finger at Simon. "The Terran has defiled a Lyran warrior. For this, it must be eliminated." The guards surged forward, weapons humming. Simon braced himself, jaw set, eyes locked on Lyra. She moved, sliding off the pod's bench to stand between Simon and the rifles. Her voice, when it came, was icy and sharp as shattered glass. "Stop!" The commander's eyes narrowed. "You challenge my order, warrior?" Lyra glanced back at Simon, and in that flicker he saw regret, apology, something deeper. She turned to the commander, face schooled to blankness, voice steady and cold. "You misunderstand, Commander. This being is not my rescuer. It is my captive. Its incompetence caused our crash. When I was weakened, I did not seek its aid. I took what I needed. Its species produces heat. I used it as a tool. It served its purpose." The lie tasted like blood, but it was the only shield she had. She stepped aside, gesturing at Simon with the imperious air of a conqueror. "It is my Keth, my bonded captive. I claim it under salvage law. Its life is mine to spare." For a moment the commander's disgust warred with the unassailable logic of Lyraean tradition. At last he inclined his head. "Secure your property. Quarantine it. We depart in 5 minutes." He turned on his heel, snapping orders to the guards. Simon was yanked from the pod, hands bound, his expression hard but unyielding. He caught Lyra's gaze as they led him away, and in the flicker of amber light, something wordless passed between them. The journey to the Lyraean rescue ship was a blur of noise and confusion. Simon flanked by guards, Lyra silent at his side, her face a mask of cold command. They moved through stark corridors, past curious glances and whispered speculation. At last, Simon was locked in a bare, windowless cell, alive, but a prisoner. He waited, pacing, every muscle tense. Eventually the door slid open and Lyra entered, her armor immaculate, her crown points polished, her bearing regal. For a heartbeat, she was the warrior again, untouchable, implacable. "You're unharmed?" she asked, voice clipped, eyes carefully guarded. Simon lifted a brow, half smiling. "I'm fine. That was quite a show." Her lips twitched, almost a smile, quickly suppressed. "It was necessary. The commander is rigid. The truth would have doomed us both." "So now I'm your property," Simon said, voice wry. "Not sure if that's an improvement." She met his gaze, letting the mask slip just enough for him to glimpse the turmoil beneath. "It was the only way, Simon." She spoke his name softly, reverently, a secret gift in this cold place. "You are my ward, protected by ancient law. It's a loophole. It shields you from them. Not a slave, not a prize, a ward, your secret." He said the words quietly, understanding dawning. Lyra lifted her chin, defiant. "You saved me. I saved you. We are even." She turned, boots echoing on the metal floor, but paused at the threshold. Looking back, her amber eyes shimmered with secrets, and something dangerous, a promise and a challenge in one. They had survived the cold, but a new trial had begun. He was her prisoner now, and she, in ways she was only beginning to grasp, was his. Half a year had passed since the icy nightmare of Stasis 7. Gone were the frigid shadows and the desperate intimacy of survival. Now Simon lived beneath the golden-green canopy of Lyrae, the Lyraean homeworld, a place of riotous color and shimmering heat. He was its prisoner, but the cell was gilded, smooth marble floors, cascades of climbing flora, a terrace with sweeping views of endless jungle. He wore fine Lyraean silks, dined on delicacies, and walked the shaded garden paths at will. Yet nothing changed the truth. As a ward, he was a legal anomaly, tolerated but never accepted. Servants watched him with sidelong glances, expressions caught between curiosity and contempt. To them, he was Lyra's Terran pet, an outsider whose presence stained their ancient traditions. From his seat on a low stone bench, Simon recognized the sound of footsteps, a measured, even stride, the cadence of a warrior at rest. Lyra appeared along the winding garden path, her posture impeccable, the sharp lines of her silver robe slicing through the dappled sunlight. She stopped beside him, hands clasped behind her back in the practiced gesture of command. "The botanists say you've been studying the Cithra vine's nitrogen cycle," she said, her tone formal, clipped. "It's fascinating," Simon replied, matching her neutrality. "Earth has similar plant partnerships, mutualistic symbiosis, but the Cithra is more aggressive. It outcompetes nearly everything." Lyra's lips twitched at the corners, but her eyes were conflicted. A flash of shared secrets and frustration, visible only to him. She was as much a captive of custom as he was, shackled by the invisible chains of expectation. By day, they wore their masks, warrior and alien ward. At night, everything changed. Later, in the hush of her private chambers, the facade dissolved. The heavy doors sealed with a whisper, cutting off the world outside. Servants melted away, leaving them alone in a space scented with living crystal and the faint metallic tang of Lyraean incense. The air thickened with anticipation. Lyra approached, clad in the simplest of silver robes. The ceremonial crown points of her lineage were gone, leaving only the natural arch of her brow and the straight fall of white hair to frame her face. She stopped before him, amber eyes searching his, open, unguarded. The warrior's mask slipped, vulnerability flickered across her features. Simon reached out, his fingers tracing the delicate line of her jaw. Her skin was no longer icy. Here, surrounded by the planet's sweltering heat, her people thrived. But with him, another fire burned, one that was softer and more dangerous. She leaned into his touch, her eyes closing in a small, unconscious surrender. "I despise this," she murmured, voice low. "Pretending you're just a curiosity." He stroked her cheek, thumb brushing the hollow beneath her eye. "It keeps us safe. It keeps us together." Together. The word was strange on her tongue, fragile and new. Her hand settled over his heart, feeling its steady beat through the fabric. "Did you feel their eyes on us today?" "I always feel them," he admitted, voice barely above a whisper. "Especially your matriarch." A shadow crossed Lyra's face. "My great-aunt guards our family's honor. She sees only risk. She's waiting for you to slip, for me to falter." Simon lifted her hands, pressing his lips to her knuckles. "Let her wait. Let them all wait. They can't see us here." Her fingers tightened on his shoulders, drawing him close. The memory of the pod haunted their quiet moments. Then, they had needed warmth. Now they needed each other. Lyra tilted her head back, exposing her throat in a gesture of trust. Simon leaned down, his lips meeting hers, slow, deep, reclaiming the intimacy daylight denied. The heat of her chambers was stifling, but here, it was a balm. He was the only one she let past her defenses, the only one she allowed to see the cracks in her armor. They parted only when breath ran short, foreheads pressed together in the hush. "I wish," she began, but the words failed her. I know, Simon said softly. Me too. The next morning dawned with the buzz of urgent summons. Lyra's uniform was immaculate, her composure flawless, but Simon saw the tension in her eyes as she left. He watched from the window as she strode toward the central spire, shoulders squared, every step a silent declaration. The clan matriarch, Ceres, presided in a chamber carved from living crystal. Sunlight poured through refracting panes, scattering rainbows across the polished floor. The air was heavy with the scent of tradition and old grievances. Lyra entered, bowing with precise formality. Ceres regarded her with the cold patience of stone. Her crown points were taller than Lyra's, lacquered jet, her robes heavy with ancient sigils. I hear troubling reports, Lyra, she began, voice as sharp as breaking ice. They concern your Terran ward. Lyra kept her face impassive. My ward is my own concern, matriarch. Ceres's nostrils flared, the faintest sign of irritation. The council accepted a loophole to avoid scandal, she said. Not an alliance. Commander Thalin has been investigating. He claims your story is a cover for weakness. You keep the Terran too close. You allow it access to our archives. You treat it as an equal. End this. Send the human to the orbital labs. There, it will be of use. The words landed like blows. To send Simon away was to consign him to a life as a specimen, a subject for study, prodded and catalogued, never again allowed the warmth of her presence. To defy the matriarch was to risk everything, her honor, her position, even Simon's life. Lyra forced herself to meet Ceres's eyes. My ward's knowledge aids my research, she said, her tone edged with steel. His utility is the only reason he remains. To question my judgment is to question my worth as a warrior. Is that your intention? The chamber crackled with unspoken challenge. Servants stilled. Even the subtle hum of the climate regulators seemed to pause. Ceres's gaze narrowed. A silent duel, power against power. At last, she inclined her head, granting a concession but not victory. Ensure his utility does not become a liability. You are dismissed. Lyra bowed, perfectly measured, and turned on her heel. Each step away from the matriarch's presence was a release, and yet, as she walked the crystalline corridors, dread pooled in her chest, a cold that recalled Stasis 7, seeping into her bones, warning her that the warmth she'd found was as fragile as a flame in the void. Simon knew he couldn't wait for fate. He had learned, in the hard vacuum between hope and survival, that passivity was its own kind of prison. While Lyra fought political battles in sun-bright chambers and shadowy council halls, he waged a quieter campaign, one of study, of intent focus. If he was to remain on Lyrae, it would not be as a relic or a ward, but as something more. So he turned each day into a mission, his curiosity sharpened by necessity and the thin thread of freedom that tied him to Lyra. His access to the Lyrian archives was a privilege she had wrestled for, a fragile concession purchased with her reputation and cunning. Simon intended to justify every moment of it. He threw himself into the texts, scrolls, crystal tablets, and neural projections, devouring the history of conquests, the intricacies of Lyran ritual, and most of all, the labyrinthine web of laws that governed every facet of their society. He noted the way the Lyran mind revered precedent. A law written centuries ago still cast its shadow on the present. Custom was more than habit, it was doctrine. But that same reverence bred rigidity. Simon saw, beneath the veneer of order, the hairline cracks. Every contradiction, every obscure footnote, became a possibility. Days blurred as he mapped the Codex of Conquest, looking for a single thread that could unravel the binds that held him. He found it deep within a legal treatise, barely a footnote, lost in a litany of statutes. The law described the fate of a sentient war captive who demonstrated exceptional value to the clan. Such a being could be granted Siratal, citizenship of merit. It was not a myth, but a codified escape, legal personhood, not property, advisor and protected member of the house. Not a pet, not a specimen, a person. Simon's heart hammered as he copied the relevant lines onto his tablet, cross-referencing the citations, checking for amendments. The council's obsession with precedent would work in their favor. The law was old, but not dead. It waited to be claimed. He was so engrossed that he didn't hear the doors glide open until boots scraped the stone. Commander Thalin entered, flanked by 2 armed guards. The archivists bowed and withdrew, leaving Simon alone in the cavernous hall with the commander's predatory stare. Thalin circled Simon like a predator sizing up its prey. His armor gleamed, the ceremonial blade at his hip catching a glint of the evening light. "Does she let you sleep at her feet?" Thalin sneered, voice slick with malice. "Or just warm her bed?" Simon met his gaze, keeping his hands loose, his posture open, but unafraid. "I serve warrior Lyra as the council decreed, Commander." A muscle twitched in Thalin's jaw. He leaned in, eyes burning with barely contained rage. "Your story is a lie. I saw the way you look at each other. I'll expose her for what she is. She'll be disgraced, and you dissected. Every flaw, every weakness laid bare for the scientists." Simon's mind raced, but he kept his face placid. "Lyra is a decorated warrior. You're a rescue captain who arrived late and questions her report. That's a greater dishonor than any rumor you might spread." Thalin stiffened. His hand dropped to his blade hilt, knuckles white. Simon's audacity hung between them, daring him to cross the line. For a heartbeat, Simon thought Thalin might strike. Instead, the commander spat at his feet. "Clever for a soft thing, but cleverness won't save you." He turned sharply, boots echoing as he stalked out, guards in tow. Simon exhaled slowly, tension leaking from his shoulders. He gathered his notes, his mind already skipping ahead. He had what he needed, but time was running out. That night, as twilight bled through the crystalline walls, Lyra found him in her chambers. She moved silently, the set of her shoulders betraying her exhaustion. Simon stood at the window, eyes lost in the fractured city lights below. She crossed to him and touched his arm, seeking reassurance as much as offering it. "You're late," he said softly, not looking back. She sighed, voice tight. "The council's in an uproar. Thalin's been stirring the matriarchs. He wants to force my hand." Simon turned, searching her face. "He came to the archives today, threatened both of us." Lyra's jaw clenched, but her hands shook. "He'll do it. My aunt warned me. She already suspects. She's waiting for a mistake." "Then we can't wait," Simon said, taking her trembling hands in his. "We can't keep hiding, hoping things will change. We have to act." She pulled away, pacing the length of the chamber. "Act? He's a commander, Simon, with allies and tradition behind him. Any move I make will be proof of guilt. He'll twist it." "Even a challenge? Not if you challenge him on your terms." Simon thrust the tablet into her hands, pointing to the highlighted passage. "Read." She scanned the text, confusion giving way to dawning comprehension. Her amber eyes widened, flicking up to meet his. "Asira Tal, citizenship of merit. I thought it was legend, a tale told to keep captives compliant." "But it's law," Simon said, his voice urgent. "Buried but real. Precedent. The council worships precedent. Thalin's attacking your honor. Use that. Challenge him to a trial of merit, not to defend but to prove my value. Demand the status I've earned. Turn his attack into your victory." Lyra stared at him, the weight of her lineage and their impossible situation reflected in her eyes. She could see it, the path forward, reckless and dangerous, so utterly Terran it made her want to laugh. Yet as she looked into Simon's face, she saw not just resolve, but hope. The same hope that had carried them through Stasis 7's darkness. "If we do this," she said, voice low. We can't go back. If we fail, I lose everything. You lose more. Simon stepped closer, pressing her hands between his. We lost everything once before, in that pod. We built something from nothing. I won't hide. Not for them. Not for anyone. A slow, disbelieving smile broke across her lips, the warrior's mask falling away. The tension in her body bled out, replaced by something fierce and determined. A trial of merit, she whispered, the words tasting like freedom. Let him come. She looked at Simon, and in her gaze was the promise of defiance, of partnership, not as captor and captive, but as equals daring to claim their place in a world that had never intended to grant it. The Lyran Council's high chamber was a place of judgment, a cavernous hall of cold crystal and shadow where law was ancient and mercy scarce. Elders sat in silent rows, their black crown points gleaming, faces masked in inscrutable calm. Every movement, every breath echoed in that solemn space. The silence was weighty, expectant. Lyra stood alone at the center of the floor, her silver robe a pool of light in the darkness. Her posture was flawless, hands clasped behind her back. Across from her, Commander Thalen projected quiet confidence, his uniform starched, his glare sharp and unyielding. Between them hung the fate of everything she and Simon had risked. Thalen's voice cut the silence. Members of the Council, I present grave concerns regarding Warrior Lyra's recent conduct. Her account of the Stasis 7 disaster contradicts sensor logs and established protocols. She claims survival against overwhelming odds, yet her own report is riddled with sentiment and self-justification. I contend that she has compromised her honor, and by extension, the Council's. He let his accusation linger, gaze shifting to the watching elders. She allowed a Terran, a being of unknown loyalty, unprecedented access to our archives. She keeps it as her ward, not her captive. This is not strength, but weakness masked as compassion. If we accept this precedent, what becomes of Lyraean law? A low murmur rippled through the chamber. The elder's eyes flicked to Lyra, weighing her against centuries of expectation. Lyra did not look at Simon, though she sensed him, steady, resolute, among the audience, his presence a quiet anchor. Her arguments were prepared, every word honed with Simon's guidance. But she felt the Council's gaze pierce her armor. Doubt was a living thing in this place. She stepped forward, her voice carrying clear and unwavering through the hush. Commander Thalen speaks of honor, she began, the syllables crisp as crystal. But he seeks to mask his own failure. His rescue was late. He found a survivor who endured not by luck, but by ingenuity. Gasps and whispers broke out among the Council, the first cracks in their stony composure. She pressed on. The Terran was not my savior. It was my tool. I saw an anomaly, an opportunity, and I used it. I bent it to my will. This is not weakness, but the core of Lyraean strength, forging victory from the unexpected. That is the tradition I uphold, not betray. Thalen's jaw tightened. Lyra let him stew in the silence, then turned to address the Council more directly. My ward has proven its value, she continued, each word deliberate. It was this Terran using nonlinear analysis who uncovered a law even our own scholars had forgotten. She lifted her hand, activating her wrist console. The chamber lights dimmed and the statute flickered into view above her palm, ancient glyphs shining in electric blue. Citizenship of merit, a path, written in our codex, for a being of worth to become a person. Not property, not a specimen, but a legal member of our house, bound in service and honor. The room stirred. Several elders leaned forward. Thalen's composure faltered, his lips thinning. Lyra turned her gaze to the Council's highest tier. I do not merely defend my honor. I claim new honor for my house. I petition the Council to recognize the law, Grant Simon Reed citizenship of merit. For a moment the chamber was silent as the vacuum between stars. Then, all at once, it erupted. Whispers, exclamations, the fluttering of ceremonial robes. Elders conferred in urgent, hushed tones, the chamber alive with unprecedented possibility. Lyra's words had landed like a thunderbolt. She had not only defended herself, she had seized the offensive, demanding the council look forward, not back. Thalin tried to recover, his voice sharp with outrage. This is manipulation, exploiting dead law for personal gain. The Terran has bewitched our warrior. But the eldest counselor raised a hand, silencing him with a glance. Enough, the council will deliberate. Lyra bowed, her face impassive. Thalin glared daggers, but tradition required silence now. The two were escorted from the floor, leaving the elders to debate behind closed crystal doors. The waiting was agony. Lyra and Simon were led to a private antechamber, bare but for a small window, the view a dizzying sweep of the city's spires and lush gardens far below. Lyra paced, every muscle tight, the mask she wore in public now slipping with each passing minute. Simon watched her, uncertain if he should speak. Finally, unable to bear the tension, he crossed to her and caught her hands in his. Her fingers were warm, but trembling. I failed to prepare for this, she whispered, voice thin with exhaustion. The council, Thalin. He squeezed her hands, grounding her. You didn't fail. You fought for us. You stood in front of the whole council and demanded a future no one dared to imagine. She looked up at him, amber eyes stormy. And if they refuse? If they strip me of my name or... Then we start again, he said, his voice soft but fierce. Whatever happens, Lyra, the time in the pod, it was real. Everything since has been real. It was, she breathed, tears glimmering unshed. It was a confession, a declaration, something more precious than any law. Simon stepped closer, cupping her face in his hands, brushing his thumb over the line of her jaw. The heat between them was no longer about survival. It was a current of hope, reckless and bright. He kissed her slowly with the tenderness of a promise. The rest of the world faded away, leaving only the two of them and the possibility that had brought them here. They broke apart, breathless but stronger. No longer just survivors, they were partners, united not by accident but by choice, by courage. A chime rang through the chamber, sharp and final. The council's verdict was ready. Lyra straightened, mask back in place, but her eyes shining with resolve. Simon took her hand, and together they turned to face whatever future awaited them. The summons came. They entered the council chamber, shoulders squared, hand in hand. Lyra's touch anchored Simon as they passed beneath the arch of living crystal, into the heart of Lyraean law and legacy. The elders waited on their high dais, black-crowned and silent, their faces carved from centuries of precedent. Every eye in the chamber was upon them, servants and warriors, skeptics and allies, all bearing witness to a moment neither tradition nor prophecy had foreseen. The eldest elder rose, her presence filling the chamber like the toll of a great bell. Her voice resonated, clear and implacable. The council has decided. Commander Thalin, your accusation is without merit. You are censured for challenging a decorated warrior's word and for sowing discord in the house. The words struck like a blade. Thalin, who had stalked these halls so long with arrogance, paled visibly. His fists clenched and unclenched at his sides. The proud set of his shoulders crumbled. The audience drew back as if a storm had suddenly passed over him. His power was broken, by tradition, by verdict, by the refusal of the council to let ambition disguise itself as honor. The elder turned then to Simon, her gaze shrewd and searching. Warrior, your argument is unconventional, but true to our law. Ingenuity is a virtue. The precedent stands. Simon Reed has shown exceptional merit to House Vera. By council authority, he is granted citizenship of merit. He is no longer property, but a person under Lyraean law, advisor to your house." There was a hush, as if the whole chamber held its breath in wonder and disbelief. It was done. The impossible had been made real, written into the living record of Lyraean tradition. Simon felt his knees threaten to give way, relief surging through him so intensely it was almost pain. Lyra reached for his hand, squeezing tight. She stood tall, her profile proud, but her hands shook with pent-up emotion. The council dismissed them, the formality of ritual closing around the decision like the final notes of a song. They bowed, Simon, now as an equal, Lyra as his champion, and turned away from the centuries-old eyes that had judged them. Together they walked from the chamber, the echo of the verdict ringing in their ears. Outside, the world seemed transformed. The gardens, once a maze of suspicion and whispered mockery, felt new beneath the cool glow of Lyri's twin moons. The servants' gazes followed them, but where there had been wariness or scorn, there was now a measured respect. The rules had changed, no longer the warrior and her pet, but the warrior and her alien advisor. The pretense that had protected them had become truth, sanctioned by law and sealed by courage. They walked along the marble paths, silent at first, letting the gravity of the moment settle into their bones. Night-blooming flowers perfumed the air. The crystalline towers of the city shimmered with 100 subtle colors, the light of the moons washing everything in silver and blue. Simon looked up, marveling at the beauty he was now free to claim as his own. He stopped at the edge of the terrace, where the view dropped away to forest and river. Lyra stood beside him, her face turned to the sky, the twin moons reflected in her amber eyes. He watched her, memorizing the proud tilt of her chin, the softness that finally edged her features now that the battle was over. He cleared his throat, smiling as the tension eased from his chest. "An advisor," he mused, his tone light but laced with awe. "What's my first advice?" Lyra turned to him, the moonlight gilding her hair and setting fire to her eyes. For a heartbeat, she was the warrior again, composed, untouchable. But then a slow, genuine smile softened her features, revealing the woman beneath the armor. She stepped closer, her body brushing his, warmth radiating from her skin. She let her hands rest at his waist, fingers tracing the belt of his Lyran tunic. "Advise me," she said, voice low and intimate, "on how long you intend to keep me waiting before you join me in my bed tonight." The challenge in her words sent a thrill through him, each syllable charged with the promise of everything they had fought for. Simon's breath caught. The world narrowed to the space between them. He reached up, cradling her jaw, letting his thumb graze the delicate edge of her crown points. The memory of their first desperate embrace in the stasis pod flickered through his mind. Cold, need, fear. Now, every touch was a choice, every caress a declaration. "This time," she whispered, eyes never leaving his, "it's not for survival." The longing in her gaze was no longer hidden, no longer a secret only darkness could shelter. "It's just for us." He bent to kiss her, slow and deep, his hands tangling in her hair, her body pressed firm against his. The gardens around them faded to shadow and song, the cool air a contrast to the heat between them. They stood in the moonlight, no longer outcasts, no longer hiding. Partners, equals, and something more. For the first time, the future belonged to them. And as the moons climbed higher, Simon realized that for all he had lost, all he had survived, this, her touch, her trust, her love, was what he had fought for all along. This brings our story to a close. Don't forget to hit subscribe, give the video a like, and share in the comments which part you enjoyed the most. Our team will truly appreciate your support. There are plenty more exciting stories waiting for you on our channel. See you in the next video.